And then let's put this on off. Okay, here we go.
3, 2. Hi, everybody. This is Mark Ciappardini. Thank you so much for coming back to the GoSeeTalk Podcast Experience, man. When you want sound, you want adventure, you want your pulse to race, you call one person, a man who is as big as Kong. He's a soldier, he's a kingsman, he's a fixer, he's a sonic predator, and he makes you fly, literally, out of your seat, in the theater, at your home, whatever. You'll like levitate off the ground. So we are thrilled to talk to the kick-ass composer, Henry the Man Jackman. Henry, good to speak with you. Good. How are things in
Hang on. You're going to have to do that one more time because it's not Jackson, it's Jackman. That's all right. It happens a lot. That was such a good intro, though. That was really well written.
Well, that's the beauty of editing. So, all right. Look. Hi, everybody. This is Mark Ciappardini. Thank you for coming back to the GoSeeTalk Podcast Experience. We are thrilled and delighted and super excited to welcome the man, Henry Jackman. Jackman. Can you hear that? His name echoes in eternity. He's like Maximus. He's like Superman. He's worked with Seal. He's a kick-ass composer, and we're thrilled to spend more time with him. So we are very happy bunnies. So Henry, how have you been? How are things in your world?
Oh, very good. I mean, that was an unbelievably generous intro. If I could have that every morning, perhaps I'd write twice as quickly.
Well, speaking of writing, I'm curious about two things. The climate and the workflow has been changing due to technological innovations and AI. And I'm also curious, kind of what your thoughts, what your dabble, what your experiences, and also what do you think about that fad they're calling 8K audio, where it like swims around your ears?
Well, that's more of to be honest with you, the primary objective for a film, a lot of technological advances are interesting, actually, particularly AI, but some of the more spatial stuff is not really going to affect, like for example, the movie BLUFF. You go into a bit of a meditation about, what kind of themes, what kind of textures, what's it going to sound like. Further down the line is, when it comes to 5.1, 7.1, all sorts of like spatial developments in sound, that's going to be secondary to figuring out theme and texture and whatnot. It's not like it's not important. AI is a really interesting one. Funnily enough, I've consulted it a couple of times when I was trying to solve a harmonic problem, and I offered up to AI, and it came up with a solution, and then I sort of went, yeah, that's interesting, but that's a bit obvious, and then I told ChatGPT actually how I'd solved it, and then ChatGPT said, "Yeah, I got to admit that is a slightly better solve." But who knows? We might all be out of a job soon. Yeah, it's interesting, but not it. At the moment, I don't see it as part of the core, so the creative laying of the initial eggs, as it were. You know what I mean? It's an interesting thing to consult, but I mean, you just don't know where technology is going to go. So wasn't there a sort of bold statement by IBM in the 70s? I see no reason why domestic households would have any need for a computer, a home computer. The whole idea of a home computer, I mean, that didn't age very well. So any bold statements about AI, I think, it could go anywhere. The funny thing, I can't remember who I was talking to, is very knowledgeable in this field, said the thing about AI at the moment, because most people, quite understandably, don't understand the absolute ins and outs of how it's being constituted. People generally fall into two camps that are both slightly wrong. It's either it's going to take over the world like Terminator 2 and destroy everything, or it's completely meaningless, it's not going to affect me in any way. And it's probably neither. It's probably not that we're heading straight to the end of the earth, and it's also not something that will have no impact by any means. It's probably somewhere in the middle.
I tend to buy that simply because if you think of where, if you don't want to vacuum your floor, there's a Roomba. If you need, it's a tool. It's like, the problem is when it starts doing things on its own, like an axe. If you're going to cut down a tree, you need an axe. Axe can't wield itself. But I think when you use it as a tool, use it as a sounding board, I can imagine exactly. As everybody needs like a little bit of inspiration. But here's kind of the thing. I think what you were getting at, like when people say it's crazy or brilliant, so to speak, it's sort of, it doesn't take any investment. You type something, it's like, oh, I'm willing to just take whatever it gives me, in terms of like, draw me a picture of Abraham Lincoln on a gorilla, like whatever it is. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I didn't do that. I think that's great because I put no stakes in the game. And I think that's why people putting stock in it. But I think, if you push a little harder, use it as a tool to get to the next good thing and the next good thing, which is, like in being in a band, sort of jam and collaborate.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Sounding board's probably a good way of looking at it. But it didn't have a huge role in Bluff, I can tell you that. Kevin had a much bigger role in Bluff than AI did.
yeah. Well, he was telling me that you wanted to get back to the things you grew up listening to. UK jungle funk, is that
Yeah.
exactly the term?
It's well, here's the thing. The movie, which is now out, so I can talk freely about it, it's obviously a pirate movie, but we're a long way from Pirates of the Caribbean, which, by the way, has an amazing score, courtesy of Hans. But it's a very different, that's like Disney. Even though Gore Verbinski put his own slant on it, this is a really pretty brutal R-rated. The funny thing is, the Bluff is still hugely fun and entertaining, but it's very raw. And I had this idea really early on that I wanted to get back to a sort of drum and bass jungle thing that I was really into, in the 90s, but obviously not super genre specific, right? I mean, if it literally sounded like drum and bass and jungle, i.e. like cut up break beats and bass lines and whatnot, that it would just sound way too genre specific, but more like the rhythmic principles and the attitude. So I had this crazy idea. I thought that I don't think this will ever work because I'm just not going to find a performer who will be able to understand this idea. But I was just thinking of a groove of just like, I was like, okay, but except I'm doing beatbox. The way to make it more art house, is there any way a cellist could go, and then, for the rhythm, it'd be like, and it would be so unconventional. I just have to hang out with someone for the day and, stack it up more like a, production style recording where we just jam around and get these Lego bricks and sort of assemble stuff. And I'm thinking, who do I know who I could ring and go, hey, listen, can we hang out? All right, have you got the music? Well, yeah, in here, but it's going to be sort of like building up a groove only out of notes, and then we'll like process it and then jam on top of it. And I've kind of got a lot of the ideas, but nothing's written down, and I'll pick a tempo. But it's not quite true. I'd actually written a theme that was more like a lyrical theme, but that wasn't what that I'd already I'd done a version of that and played it to the director, and he was happy with that. This was more for the vocabulary, the sound, and all the action stuff. So I showed up to the studio, and then that's right. I called Matt. I said, Matt, how are we going to find someone? And he said, we need to hang out with this guy, Kevin, who is so humble. He's so, he's like world famous for how many millions of records have they sold as part of Pentatonics? Like 2 million records or something. He described himself as, not like a classical cellist, which is absolutely true. But by the way, he is actually technically brilliant, because aside from the kind of drum and bass thing, which I'll talk about, right at the end, I was like, hey, listen, while we're here, we still got a bit of time. I've got a version, that I just programmed temporarily in MIDI, and it's, got to check. Could you also play, I don't think we even had the part written out. Can you play this like very lyrical theme? And he completely shifted gears out of drum and bass, and then proceeded to play this theme as if he was the lead cellist of the London Philharmonic. So, I mean, he can pretty much, the idea that he's, only like a sort of unconventional cellist, he's also like a beautifully technically gifted cellist who can play lyrical themes and whatnot. Anyway, that's not how the session started. The session started with a bit of an explanation, some headphones going tick tock 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 tick tock, and me going, okay, Kevin, can we go on these two notes that we picked? So we got a bit of and he was so open. I was thinking the problem might be my ability to translate what I'm trying to expect, and he just like jumped on it straight away. The other thing is, jungle and drum and bass, I guess, is a bit more of a UK thing, but he was just like all over it within seconds. So we started building this groove, and then it was like, okay, let's get a bit of a, just hardly playing a note, just sort of texture. And then we start hitting the cello and doing various different rhythms and whatnot, things that go across it, like all these cross rhythms and whatnot. And it was so much fun. And so we were able to build this thing I'd had in my head for a couple of months. By the time we tracked it up and done a bunch of things and worked with the engineer, Chris Vogel, we sort of built this thing up out of like 10 cello tracks. I mean, that's pretty much what I was imagining. Now that, it's all very well having an idea, you know, and it's such an unconventional way to think about a cello that, you know, you could have asked so many players to do that, and players who are, you know, perfectly gifted and whatnot, but without music and with some mad Englishman banging on about jungle, you would have got nowhere. But Kevin's like innate sense of rhythm, and more importantly, just like he was so open-minded about it. He's like, well, let's just try what this mad person's saying. But the other thing that's really important about Kevin is you know, if you play the cello and the objective is traditional musical phrases, there's a way of doing that. If you're suddenly going to decide to use the cello more or less as a sort of drum machine, it requires a completely different approach to playing. It's much more aggressive, much more unconventional, and that's where I was so happy that we found Kevin, because, you know, you could imagine a cellist go dum pum bum pum bum pum. It's like no, that's not it. No, it helps when you put a bit of distortion and everything on it, but it's like understanding that you're using the cello like a drum kit, which is not what most people are accustomed to doing. So he was really, really open-minded, and I'm not kidding. Within like an hour, we'd built this whole series of textures, and then after that, there were loads of other. So, you know, a toolkit of various ideas and trills and movements and all these various recordings, because I really wanted to make BLUFF have as little programming as it was. How, by endless manipulation of this session that we've had with Kevin, you know, how much can we use from these recordings? And they, obviously they got hugely transformed, talking, maybe not AI, but technologically, all sorts of crazy things happened to these recordings. So various textures that are almost unrecognizable from their original audio. But, and in the course of the score later, you know, especially as the movie develops, there is use of what you might call a traditional chamber orchestra playing, you know, regular notes and chords and whatnot. But I really wanted to use as much of that very individualistic and highly performed. I mean, for example, there was once we built this groove, and all, and the movement in the bass and all the little 16s and all the various rhythms. He just started attacking. It's the sort of thing you would never think of with a traditional cellist, or if you were writing on a sequencer. It was just like attacking notes and going, you know, and it doesn't sound like, if you tried to program that, you'd be like, well, what's that? It's just like a single note. But he attacked them with such personality that they became quite a feature in the score for when Ursel, who is the female protagonist of the movie, when she's in her sort of badass mode, some of those like violent single hits with him kind of scraping off the cello they had so much personality that they, you know, it sort of took the place of chords or other ideas. So I was just like, I was so happy about the individualistic nature of those kind of textures, because it's all coming from the performance of an individual. It's not plural. And the other thing I was really happy about was sometimes you have those kind of experiments and then maybe the director's not open-minded enough and only a little bit of that original idea sort of seeps into the score, somewhat sanitized or whatever. And that was absolutely not what happened. It was a direct, so it wasn't like, because sometimes what happens is you write an initial idea or a suite and you play it to, hey, check this out, this could be like the tone of the movie. But somehow or other, by the time you finish the score and you've got into the detail of the cues, it's sort of all got backed off a bit and things have become a bit more conventional. And that is, that's not what happened. No, not with Mr. Flowers, our director. He was all over the idea, because where it really locked in, because it wasn't just me being indulgent, where the whole concept locked in with the director was his whole speech was like, I love Pirates of the Caribbean. That's a different kind of pirate movie. This has got to be rough, raw. You know, I'm always telling the costume, I want to see dirt under the fingernails. And so, the musical equivalent of whatever dirt under the fingernails is. So I was kind of floating, downstream. The current was with me. I wasn't trying to push a director into something that he was uncomfortable with. he was delighted with the whole idea. And as soon as he started hearing the result of these experiments, he absolutely loved it. So it was, because you got to be, you got to be careful with when you have slightly unconventional ideas. You've got to figure out whether you're having them because it serves the movie or you're having them because you want to be cool. And in this case, it's sort of happily the two things coincided, because a really traditional score just wouldn't have respected what the director had done tonally with the movie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's quite a few things that you could tell from the get-go that this movie was going to be different. I mean, I was
Oh,
telling Kevin yesterday that, when Bloody Mary kind of hits the guy with a knife in the back of the hamstring, or uses the
oh,
gold as a mortar explosion, it's like, okay,
yeah.
this is not your typical, but also the movie even sets it up. It says, these are the last of the pirates. So you imagine, like, the last two rats in a barrel, like,
Yeah.
they've cannibalized each other to the point they're the strongest ones, and that they have no mercy. But coming from you, from a guy who used the bass line as a theme for Magneto and turned it into
Yeah.
like one of the most striking parts of the movie, that's what people remember because it works with the character. And I think the juxtaposition of what Kevin did, you don't want Yo-Yo Ma, you want Niall Marr or Guthrie
Oh yeah,
Jovan,
no disrespect to Yo-Yo Ma. There is absolutely no way Yo-Yo Ma could have done what
Mhm.
Kevin did. I mean, no way. It's horses. And we all know Yo-Yo Ma is one of the greatest cellists in living and non-living memory. But it's casting. So yeah, we were really lucky in that respect. Because often those things you need a couple of go. It's a bit there's a bit of trial and error. But I mean, we were just flying straight away. The other
So
thing
what
that I
was
was,
the
sorry, go ahead.
so what was the one scene that you kind of started with, just to make sure that this idea of being dirty and gritty was actually going to work? Because it's one thing to, like you said, the director may start to play it safe after a while, but once you put it on one scene, you're like, oh yeah, then it sort of
Yeah.
fits.
Well, it was probably, let's see, the very beginning of the movie has on the soundtrack, it's called Haven, and that was one of the more lyrical ones. Once Captain Connor shows up and the island's getting invaded, there's a scene, the first scene where Ursula is attacked in her own house was the first outing for a lot of this crazy stuff. Now, the cues always change name compared to the soundtrack. It's either called, I don't think it's called Bloody Mary. I can't quite remember what the name of the track is on the soundtrack, but in the movie, it's early on, and it's the first time that Ursula is attacked by some of Captain Connor's men in her own house, where the dunk 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 dunk, and the sort of crazy bass and a lot of that hard attack I was telling you about that just goes ding, all that starts showing out. And so all of the percussion, I mean, there's a lot of production techniques as well, like distortion and overdrive and whatnot, but that percussion as well isn't let's get a percussionist in or let's program some stuff. It was all based on I felt a bit bad, saying, hey, we better not damage your cello. But yeah, a lot of those a lot of the pattern, the actual non-tonal drum patterns and stuff is still the cello being hit and manhandled and then, tuned down an octave and messed around with technology to make it really gnarly. But that was the first outing, and it really tracked ourselves because Captain Connor had his own, but he had this crazy sound that kind of goes, which you hear at the beginning of the movie when you see the title card for BLUFF, and he had his own signature set of sounds that were kind of unhinged and weird. Mostly that sort of slightly drum and bass jungle influenced idea tracked Ursel when she goes into her kind of ninja mode of dismissing and dispatching everyone inside, including hammering people's face with a conch. But I think one of the reasons Frank appreciated it is, yes, it was dark and grungy, but it was very alive. It wasn't just sort of moody and dark and sort of oppressive and bleak. There's something about the cross rhythms and the syncopation, so that even though, it's not a bundle of laughs, while some woman's being attacked, you kind of got a bit of a ninja virtuoso enjoyment out of it. Not unlike, even though the music's totally different, in Kick-Ass, Mindy's a bit like that. It's like this 14-year-old girl has these crazy moves, even though she's like chopping people's heads off. Weirdly, the tone of it lets you enjoy it. It's not so brutal that it's, it's not stylized. It's funny, the tone that Frank achieved. It's not stylized, so you don't take anything seriously, but somehow it is entertaining. So you're not sitting there going, I can't watch this. This is just hideous. There's something about the virtuosity of Cell's amazing moves, because, it takes a while in the movie to find out why she's such a lethal killer, because it turns out she was actually trained by Captain Connor. But there's something about the lethality and the virtuosity of her movement that is reflected in all those like cross rhythms that come originally. The idea of that comes from all the kind of crazy syncopations you get in jungle. So yeah, it served a few functions. It was both kind of badass and ugly and grimy, but also it had enough like virtuosity and vibe about it that you could also enjoy. It wasn't just bleak sounding.
Well, I'm guessing the answer is no on this one specifically, but sometimes if a composer gets on early enough, he can compose something and play it on set so the actors can actually like feel
That
that.
happened, actually. Not in the case of all this action stuff we're talking about that had the drum and bass jungle influence. The main theme, the main lyrical theme, bum bum ba-dum bum dun dun da da dun da da dun da dun da 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 dee da da dun da da dun ba yum da dun da dun dun da ya dun, which appears actually right at the end when Priyanka actually sung it in the end credits. That I wrote really early as a theme, and believe it or not, the director Frank, he came up with lyrics for it in like under 25 minutes. I sent him a version of it, with MIDI strings kind of programmed, so at least he could hear it was arranged. It was like a traditional arrangement of it, but the nature of that melody is a bit like a song. It sounds a little bit like a sort of moody Irish sort of tragic lullaby, and he literally came up with lyrics for it in about half an hour, and it's sung it like during the movie. There's a scene where Ursula's with her son and she's sort of singing it as a lullaby, so that happened really early, and Frankie nailed the lyrics, and that was sung on set. And in fact, the end credit recording of it was the audio for that was taken from the set. We cleaned up the audio a bit, and then I put a bit of a sort of moody arrangement around it. So yeah, the main lyrical theme, which I think we called the Lament of Captain Bowden, was written, just before filming or during. But it astonished me how quickly, he just he heard it like twice and went, "Okay, I've got the lyrics."
It's got to be awesome just to be part of. You think you're working so hard, like, okay, I've got some time. Oh no, I'm back on. I got to do something with this. But I really love the diversity of the tracks and how it played up elements from the film. I mean, I used the term cornucopia of chaos yesterday when I was talking to Kevin. But there's like there's some really beautiful elements, but then you've got these beats that kind of make you feel like it's you're underwater, so it feels tied to the islands. And I just love how granular you can get to sort of make each. I mean, you have control of literally every note, so why not make it bespoke and awesome? So, which is your stock and trade.
Yeah, but it's also a testament to the movie itself, meaning, yes, it needed to be grimy and virtuosic and all this, action stuff that we were talking about for Ursula when she's in kind of ninja mode. But then there was this whole strain of longing, missing her husband and her whole backstory. And so this lament theme that I was talking about, so that there was a whole other strand, but so they're quite crazy opposites. You can go from, there's a track called The Haven, which I think might even be the first thing on the soundtrack. And that's a sort of a picture of beauty of the island before the absolute chaos. Basically, the structure of the movie is you have a very short period of time where you see this beautiful Caribbean island, then Captain Connor lands with his men, and it's claustrophobic and terrifying, and they're under severe pressure from there all the way to the end of the movie. But it's not just that first cue, Haven. There are other moments of poetry and lyrical reflection in the movie. So it was really able to go between the stuff that we've already discussed and this much more lyrical and poetic strand of music. So it's really nice to be able to, contrast that heavily. And of course, Captain Connor, he had his own slightly unhinged. I remember coming up with some sound that I called "The Bell Tolls for Thee," that just sort of goes, "Dew, dew, dew." It's sort of a quarter tone weirdness. And he had a scrapey kind of a very visceral sound that was originally from an instrument called a marxophone, I think, that is actually quite a high instrument that you can bow that went like we just sort of bowed something over it and then massively detuned it, like sort of 2 octaves. It was the equivalent of the Jurassic Park roar. You take a line and something and then tune it down 3 octaves, and suddenly it was going like, oh, 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 oh. It became a sort of terrifying Captain Connor texture. But yeah, I'd say the main strains of DNA in the movie were the material for Captain Connor, his unhinged quality, the visceral roughness pertaining to his character. A Cell was a combination of the lament theme, the lyricism in that, and then all the kind of jungleistic ninja cello distorted craziness that represented her fighting abilities. And like I say, yeah, this lament and the, it's not quite a love theme, but like it got used for family and connection and her husband and whatnot. So because the film had these different strands, it was really nice to have like heavily contrasting strands of musical DNA within the movie.
Yeah, and I was really taken by the track, and it may be different in your mind of a name from the past. And I just think it's both beautiful and bold and remarkable. So it's, yeah, again, it's not one note. I mean, nothing you do could ever be one note, but it ebbs and flows with the ocean. But well, Henry, to take us out of this, I don't know if this is a consumer perception, but when you're working on something for like a streaming platform, is there a difference between the path of travel or the productivity line? Because it seems like things happen so much faster when they go to your TV versus the theater. I'm just curious how your workflow has been inhibited or impacted by that.
No, that's an interesting question. Funnily enough, no, Bluff to me just felt like a movie.
Okay.
And the timeline was the same. I always say that if you have some important scoring or recording to do, you should be writing the cues 3 months before that, and that's always a healthy amount of time. And you're absolutely right. When it's episodic TV, I mean, there's much less artistic waffle and a lot more like get it out the door quickly. That's not to say there isn't loads of great music for episodic TV. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying you don't necessarily get the luxury of, because in the musical process here, we would meet with Frank over a 3-month period every week, listen to cues, go through cues, have discussions, come back with fixes, and have intense conversations about what the cue's supposed to do, narrative conversations, spotting. So that was no different to any other movie. The creative process for it, the fact that it's some of these movies end up in a streaming destination versus the theaters, for me, for this project, made no difference at all. It just felt like a straight up and down. Well, and also it was sort of via Agbo, which is Joe and Anthony Russo's outfit. So in a way, it felt sort of like an Agbo experience, like Cherry, other than, okay, so Joe and Anthony weren't directing it, but it was sort of through Agbo and then to Amazon. So it very much felt like the same creative process, which I'm really grateful for, which means you have time with your director, you have time to collaborate, and there's, sufficient budget for it not to be a bunch of samples at the end of it. And for it to be mixed properly. We're very lucky to have the time to mix it, especially with that kind of score. If you've got a really traditional orchestral score, once you've sort of got things in position, it's cool. But this kind of thing is more like mixing a record. So that process is also really important. So no, there was nothing about the process that was in any way hurried or compromised with the idea that streaming is if the destination of it is a streaming platform, it's somehow compromised or there's less time or whatever. That wasn't the case at all.
Okay, well, I just had to ask, and
no, it's a good question.
in addition to thanking you for your time and the music and the emotions you've given us over the years, I did want to thank you because when we spoke a long time ago, you mentioned this phrase I use all the time. You said, we don't always have time for beard stroking. And I just like the idea of like thinking about like, oh, what could this be? It's like, no, we got to write it now. That's, cues due tomorrow. So
Yeah.
thank you for helping me with that, like creative. I bring that out and people are like, oh, that's so fancy, Mark.
No, no, but it's true because the thing is, it's if everything's the first thing you think of is, I mean, if you're Mozart, the first thing you think of is so amazing and unique that that's all you need. But for us mortals, you need to. I mean, funnily enough, that sort of jungleistic thing I was talking about, I've been brewing in my head for ages. But you need a bit of time to turn over a few stones and go down a few avenues, and also you're not in a vacuum. You have ideas, and then if you're lucky enough to be working with a good director, it's the collaboration with with someone who hopefully has a vision that there's a sort of osmosis that then happens as you take on board their aesthetic, and all that stuff takes a bit of time. And that's where you get somewhere. If it's just like get the whole thing done in 2 weeks, it could easily be perfectly competent, perfectly serviceable, but it's unlikely to be something that's like the 11th thing to think of rather than the first, second, or third thing to think of. So I encourage anyone, if they're lucky enough to have enough time, to fully engage in the creative beard stroking process. Thus.
Beautifully put, wonderfully explained. To Henry, to really take us out of this, what's next for you, and when can we next have your wonderful notes percolate our
I'm not.
ears?
I always get nervous answering that question for when I answered it and I wasn't supposed to say anything. So I just need to check if it is common knowledge. Do you know what? So just to be totally safe, I won't answer that question. Only I got traumatized from answering that question for a movie that was too far ahead and then getting my wrist slapped. Let's just say I'm currently working on a large-scale, exciting movie in a franchise that I've worked on before. And that's, I'm afraid, all I'm going to say, but it'll be out relatively soon.
All right. Well, we will leave that to creative speculation
Yeah,
and
I
let
might be
the
being
internet
overcautious, and
do
if
its
you
thing.
just go on IMDb, you'll see what it is.
Well, either way, we'll wait for it in perfect harmony, and can't wait to harmonize with you and whatever you come up with. So,
Oh,
Henry,
sure.
thank you for your time, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you, sir.